Part 1. Where it all began. The land of the Greek gods. Hello. If you're listening late, when the noise is slowly dying down, and your mind is searching for something, not too exciting, not too intense, just an ancient tale, long, slow, and gentle enough to lull you to sleep, then you've come to the right place. Today we're going to enter a great myth, the Trojan War, an epic tale of men and gods, of love and hate, of the elements and betrayal. But before the Greek ships get tense, before Achilles gets angry or Hector takes up his sword on the battlefield, pause, take a deep breath, and go back to the beginning. That's ancient Greece, not a country as it is today, but a land scattered with small city-states, each a separate world. Athens, the city of wisdom. Sparta, the training ground for warriors. Delphi, where the oracles whispered the words of Apollo. And Mycenae, where King Agamemnon reigned, who would become the supreme commander in the fateful war. But in that world, there was something more powerful than kings. It was the gods. The ancient Greeks did not see the sky as empty air. They looked up and saw Olympus, the hill where the gods lived. There was Zeus, the king of the sky and thunder, who kept the balance of command. There was Hera, Zeus's wife, the queen of marriage and jealousy. Poseidon ruled the sea and earthquakes. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. And there are many other positions. Each position is a personality, a living symbol, a power. But the special thing is, the Greek positions have no function. They are jealous, they love, they hate, they fight, just like humans. And sometimes, it is the small competition between positions that leads to great wars for all humanity. Like the Trojan War that we rearrange. Can you imagine? A golden apple, just one apple, but thrown into the middle of a divine feast, sowed the seeds of 10 years of war. Just because 3 goddesses argued about who was the most beautiful. From there, seemingly random events are connected like a web of fate. Paris, the Prince of Troy, chosen to handle beauty. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, and also the cause of war. Achilles, the undefeated hero, but with fragile legs. And Troy, a fortress that shows, will collapse in flames. You have found it. This is not just a war. This is a story about people, about courage, fire, suffering, and sacrifice, and about how the smallest choices can lead to unexpected consequences. Let me tell you, from the beginning, from the footstep, it is smooth, soft, like a wind you carry back to the ancient world, where gods still walk the earth, and humans, like you and me, must bear the consequences of what was destined. Take your time. Blink if you want. You don't have to remember every detail. Just listen, and let the story wash away your worries. Here's the first episode. Where it all began. Greek mythology. Part 2. The prophecy and the birth of Achilles. It happened a long time ago. A long time ago. When the sky was still young and gods still walked the land, carrying mysteries that humans had never fully understood. At the end of the ocean, there was a sea nymph named Thetis. She was so beautiful that, when Zeus, the most powerful god on Mount Olympus, saw her, he wanted to marry her. But Zeus was not the only one. Poseidon, the god of the sea, Zeus's younger brother, was also infatuated with her. A sea nymph, 2 supreme gods, a struggle seemed inevitable. But then, a prophecy rang out. Very soft, but as cold as the winter night wind. The son of Thetis will be stronger than his father. Not equal, but stronger than Zeus and Poseidon. Zeus heard that, was silent for a long time. He did not forget that his own father, Kronos, had been overthrown by his son, and now He was facing the prospect of repeating history. Poseidon also faltered. Both backed off. Instead of marrying Thetis, Zeus decided to marry her to a human, a mortal king. A man not strong enough to give birth to a new god, but strong enough to keep the destiny from being broken. That king was named Peleus, king of Phthia, a mortal, but brave, honest, and strong enough to be the husband of a nymph. The wedding took place, with the participation of almost all the gods. They brought blessings, gifts, music, and wine. But there was one person who was not invited. It was Eris, goddess of discord, the one who sowed discord, where there seemed to be unity. Eris came without noise, without anger. She simply took a golden apple, placed it on the banquet table, and said, "For the fairest." Then she left. That apple led to a beauty contest between the three great goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. And that contest would lead to the Trojan War. But let's put that aside for now. Today, let's return to Thetis, and to the son that fate had warned us about. Thetis, although she could not marry a god, still carried the blood of the sea in her veins, and her love for her son was extremely deep. Immediately after giving birth to the child, she whispered to the sea, "My child will not die like ordinary people. My child will be immortal." And then, one night, when the sky was calm, the sea breeze whispered, she carried the child to the river Styx, the sacred river of the underworld. She immersed the child's entire body in the water, which was said to grant immortality. But she held the child by the heel, and only that part was not allowed to touch the river water. And so, an inviolable child, but with one weak spot, the heel. The child was named Achilles. Achilles grew up quickly, strong, fast, and it seemed to carry with it a light that no one could touch. Thetis knew. One day, her son would enter the battlefield, where fate had drawn a bloody path. A path with only two options: or live long, peacefully, but be forgotten, or die young, but live on in fame. Achilles did not know what he would choose, but the world was slowly preparing for the day when the storm would truly begin. Part 3, The Feast of the Gods and the Golden Apple. There are moments that seem so small, just a simple fleeting action, but they change the fate of an entire city, a nation, and even the entire world. That moment begins with a feast, a grand ceremony on Mount Olympus where all the most sacred things in Greek mythology gather. The wedding of Thetis and King Peleus was not an ordinary wedding. It was an event that brought together all the gods, a rare occasion for the entire heavens to gather, raise their glasses, and laugh. Zeus, the leader, organized the feast himself. The food was prepared by the god of cooking. The wine flowed like a stream. The melodious music from the nymphs singing and dancing. Everything was perfect. There was only one person who was not invited. A name that always made parties unstable. A shadow that was often avoided. That was Eris, the goddess of discord. Uninvited, but Eris came anyway. Not angry, not rebellious. She just walked in, amidst laughter, music, and lights. No one paid attention to her. No one stopped her. In her hand was a golden apple, shining like a small sun. She raised it high and said softly, "For the most beautiful," and then she threw the apple into the middle of the banquet table. Without another word, she turned away and disappeared. For a moment, everything seemed to continue, but then three eyes met. Hera, wife of Zeus, queen of the gods. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and love. All three were convinced that the apple was for them. At first it was polite words, half smiles. "Oh, I know you're beautiful, but can you give it to me?" Actually, wisdom is also a kind of beauty. Love is eternal and beauty is what nourishes it. But very quickly, the argument became fierce. Zeus, the leader, was pulled into the middle. All three goddesses looked at him, demanding a judgment. Zeus pondered for a long time, because he knew there was no safe answer. Praise Hera, his wife, and Athena and Aphrodite would be angry. Praise Aphrodite. He would have to face Hera's terrible jealousy. And Athena, a goddess of war, was not easily offended and would not let it go. And so Zeus did what wise men do, refused to make a decision. Instead, he called Hermes, the swift messenger, and whispered, "Bring the three to a mortal who will give the answer, a mortal who does not know that he is about to decide the fate of two kingdoms." That mortal was Paris, the Prince of Troy. He did not live in a palace. He grew up as a simple shepherd on the green slopes of Ida. And it was there that the three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, came to him. They appeared stunningly beautiful. Each one had her own aura, and they asked Paris to judge the beauty contest. The young man was stunned. The three great goddesses stood before him. They asked him to choose who was the most beautiful. Paris, at that moment, did not know that he was not only facing beauty, but also facing power, intelligence, and intrigue. They did not wait for him to answer. They began to make promises. Hera said, "If you choose me, I will give you power. The throne, fame, all of Europe and Asia will be yours." Athena said, "If you choose me, I will give you wisdom and strength so that no one can defeat you in battle." Aphrodite smiled, not promising power, not promising victory. She only said softly, "If you choose me, I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris looked at all three. He hesitated. Fame, wisdom, or love? Finally, he gave the apple to Aphrodite, and fate was sealed. Little did Paris know, the woman Aphrodite promised him, the most beautiful woman in the world, was Helen, wife of King Menelaus, king of Sparta. A queen, a wife, a queen of a mighty kingdom, and Paris's journey from a boy on Mount Ida would soon lead him to Sparta, to Helen, and the world to a bloody war that would last 10 years. But tonight, we are just beginning with a golden apple and three goddesses. Part 4. Paris and Helen, the tinder of war. After Paris gave the apple to Aphrodite, the beauty contest was over. But the war of the world had just begun. Aphrodite kept her promise. She promised Paris that he would have the most beautiful woman in the world. And that woman was none other than Helen of Sparta. Helen was more than just beautiful. She was the epitome of beauty. Her hair was like silk in the evening. Her eyes were as deep as the Aegean Sea, and her voice was like the melody of a lyre in the quiet of the night. She was the daughter of Leda and, in some legends, the daughter of Zeus himself, who transformed into a swan to meet her mother. Helen captivated many people from a young age, and when she grew up, hundreds of kings and princes from all over Greece came to ask for her hand in marriage. Helen's foster father, King Tyndareus, was worried. If he chose one man as his daughter's husband, the rest would be angry, and war might break out. Fortunately, a cunning man named Odysseus came up with a plan. "Let all the candidates," he said, "swear that no matter who is chosen as Helen's husband, all the rest will defend the marriage at all costs." A simple oath, but a powerful one. Helen then married Menelaus, king of Sparta, a strong king with power, an army, and who loved her very much. They lived in a magnificent palace surrounded by gardens of olives and lavender. Helen, queen of Sparta, and the most beautiful flower in Greece, was taken. But Aphrodite had not forgotten her promise. She whispered in Paris's ear about Helen's beauty, about a trip to Sparta under diplomatic pretense, about how a heart can be moved by a look, a smile. Paris, now a prince, but still a young man at heart, passionate, curious, and perhaps a little arrogant. He landed in Sparta. Menelaus, according to ancient Greek tradition, welcomed Paris as an honored guest. The palace was in full swing. The wine flowed, the music played, and Helen entered the great hall like she was entering her destiny. There are looks that one cannot forget for the rest of one's life. Paris looked at Helen, and the world around her faded away. No one knows what happened in her heart at that moment. Some say she was enchanted by Aphrodite, and Eros, the god of love, shot an invisible arrow into her heart. Some say she looked at Paris, and her heart broke for her. In any case, when Menelaus left the palace to attend a funeral in Crete, Paris did the irreversible. He took Helen away from Sparta. They boarded a ship, fled into the night. Helen, the queen of Sparta, became the lover of the prince of Troy. A beautiful love? Maybe. A betrayal? No doubt. A seemingly personal act, but one that called forth the sacred oath of all Greece. When Menelaus returned and learned of the affair, he was furious to the core. But he was not alone, because all the kings who had ever proposed to Helen had sworn to stand up for her. And now Menelaus summoned them. Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, and his brother, accepted. Odysseus, unwilling as he was, could not refuse the oath. Achilles, though still very young, would join the battle, and hundreds of kings, princes, generals from all over Greece came together, not just to bring back a woman, but to defend honor. That is how great wars begin, not with swords, but with oaths and broken hearts. And thus, the Trojan War was officially begun. Part 5. The Ancient Oath and the Coming Kings. When Helen left Sparta, leaving behind her throne, her crown, and a betrayed husband, the winds began to change across Greece. Menelaus, the husband whose wife had been stolen from him, was not just angry. He was humiliated before the entire kingdom and the gods. But Menelaus had a powerful card up his sleeve. Remember, years ago, all those who had ever proposed to Helen swore to her father, "No matter who is chosen, we will defend the marriage. And if anyone insults the winner, we will all fight back." This oath, seemingly a mere formality, now became a spear thrust straight into Troy. Menelaus went to see his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, ruling from Mycenae. Agamemnon did not need much convincing. Honor, power, and the chance to conquer Troy, a wealthy city located at the Eastern Gateway, were all that a conqueror needed. He agreed to lead the campaign and began sending messengers throughout the land to summon those who had sworn their oaths. From Sparta to Pylos, from Ithaca to Arcadia, from Thessaly to Crete, kings, princes, and legendary warriors were called by name. Some came for honor. Some came for fear of being seen as cowards. Some came because they simply loved battle. And from there, a huge army began to form. Among those summoned was one in particular. One man did not want to go. One man was too smart not to realize if he went, it would be difficult to return. That was Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, the man who had helped Helen's father resolve his marriage years ago. He was wise, shrewd, and always had a plan. When the messenger arrived, Odysseus pretended to be mad. He plowed the fields with oxen and donkeys, sowing salt instead of seeds, tangled hair, dim eyes. He played the part of a madman perfectly. But the messenger was not so easily fooled. They placed Odysseus's young son, Telemachus, right in front of the plowshare. Odysseus stopped. Fatherly instinct overcame his dramatic reason, and so he was dragged into the war he had tried to avoid. There was another name, resounding but not yet known, Achilles. At that time, Achilles was still very young, but the prophecy had been whispered. If Achilles goes to war at Troy, he will achieve great glory, but he will die young. His mother Thetis knew. She hid her son in the palace of Scyros, disguising herself as a girl among the maidens, just to avoid fate. But it was Odysseus who ruined the plan. He brought gifts to Scyros, silks, jewels, perfumes, and a sword. As the maidens flocked to admire the jewels, only one, Achilles, stepped forward and took the sword. And so he revealed himself. Fate called. Achilles, who would become the greatest warrior of Greece, accepted the invitation. He went to war knowing the outcome. And so, from all over, heroes gathered. Ajax, the great warrior of Salamis. Diomedes, the young and mighty king of Argos. Nestor, the elder of Pylos, the bearer of ancient wisdom. And hundreds, thousands of soldiers, archers, oarsmen. A huge fleet was formed, with thousands of ships, heading for one goal, Troy. They did not know. The journey would last 10 years. They did not know how many would not return. They only knew one thing. We have sworn we will keep our word. And so, Greece began to march east, bringing honor, love, and destiny to the Trojan War. Part 6. The fleet sets off and the first obstacles. When all the Greek kings had agreed, when the warriors, ships, and weapons were prepared, the greatest fleet in the history of ancient Greece was ready to set sail. It is said that, on the harbor of Aulis, nearly 1,200 warships were docked close together, covering the sea like a flock of giant birds. Each ship carried with it hopes, fears, anger, and destiny. Some went for honor. Some were bound by oath. Some were curious, eager, or simply because they had nothing to lose. On shore, Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, was the supreme commander. Beside him was his brother-in-law, Menelaus, who had lost his wife. And further, the faces that will be etched into the epic, Odysseus, Ajax, Nestor, Diomedes, and Achilles, the young warrior with immortal blood. But the sea is not gentle. The heavens do not follow the will of man. As the fleet prepares to set sail, a fierce wind rises from the north. It is not an ordinary storm, but a purposeful force. The ships collide. The masts break. The sea roars as if in anger. No one dares to leave the shore. Day after day. Then week after week. The wind does not stop. The generals begin to worry. People no longer believe that this is just bad weather. Something supernatural is happening. They call in a prophet, Calchas, who has the ability to listen to the will of the gods. And Calchas, after the ceremony, whispered, "The wind comes from Artemis, because King Agamemnon has offended her." Agamemnon was stunned. On a recent hunt, he had killed a white stag, which was sacred to Artemis, the goddess of hunting and the moon. And what was worse, after killing it, he proudly declared, "Even Artemis is no better a shot than I am." Such an arrogant remark for a goddess so easily angered. Calchas said, "There is only one way to appease Artemis's anger. Agamemnon must sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia." The whole camp fell silent. Agamemnon, the most powerful man, stood there, broken. This was no longer a battle for honor. It was a test of fate. At first he refused. He argued with the gods. But then, facing the risk of his soldiers rebelling, under the pressure of dozens of kings, under the gaze of his brother-in-law Menelaus, Agamemnon nodded. He sent someone to write a letter to the palace, inviting his wife and daughter to Aulis, under the pretext of arranging a marriage between Iphigenia and Achilles. Iphigenia arrived, radiant, innocent, unaware of what awaited her. But when the truth was revealed, everything seemed to collapse. The mother, Clytemnestra, cried. Achilles, though he had never loved Iphigenia, was furious. He declared that he would protect her with his life. But Calchas kept repeating, "If we do not sacrifice, the whole army will die at sea or never set sail." And then, according to legend, as soon as the blade touched the air, Artemis appeared. She raised her hand and replaced Iphigenia with a white stag, and she was taken away to be a priestess, living far from the world of men. Soon after that, the wind changed direction, the sky calmed, the sea became calm. The fleet set sail. No one spoke much after that. No one mentioned her name again. No one looked Agamemnon in the eyes. But in their hearts, they understood one thing clearly. This war is not just a matter of men, it is also a matter of gods. And the road to Troy will not be easy. Part 7. Lost in Mysia and the man who was appointed. Telephus. The wind had changed. The sea had calmed. And so, the Greek fleet set sail, after many days of being held back. More than 1,000 ships, carrying tens of thousands of people, warriors, kings, oarsmen, archers, parted the Aegean waves, heading east. They were all headed for the same place, Troy. But what happens when you've never been to a place and don't know where it is? Troy is not on the map as we know it today. It was hidden among strange lands, located in the northwest of Asia Minor, what is now Turkey. And the fleet, after many days at sea, landed on a land they thought was Troy. That place was Mysia, a completely different kingdom, but with strange banners, strong watchtowers, and sentries on the shore. The Greek generals believed they were in the right place. Without further ado, Agamemnon ordered the attack. The warriors landed. The Greek flags flew. Swords flashed. Mysia, though taken by surprise, refused to submit. Their king, a man named Telephus, brave, courageous, and very fond of his people, led his army to fight back fiercely. On that beach, the first battle of the Trojan War had taken place in the wrong place. Blood was shed. The ships were burned. Screams echoed in the morning mist. And amid the smoke and fire, Achilles, not yet 16, appeared like a flash of lightning. He fought as if the god of war had possessed him and quickly defeated Telephus. Telephus was badly wounded. The wound was inflicted by Achilles' own spear. But as before he could finish him off, the gods, or fate, intervened. The wind rose. A storm came. The Greek warriors were bewildered, and they retreated from Mysia, leaving Telephus there, alive, but in pain. The wound, despite care, would not heal. The flesh around it festered, rotted, and spread. No physician could cure it. Telephus, who had been king, now lay on his sickbed in pain day and night. Until one night, a prophecy rang out in his dream. He who bears the wound can only be healed by the same weapon that bled him. Telephus understood. Only Achilles, who had inflicted the wound, could heal it. So, the wounded king set out, exhausted, for Aulis, where the Greek fleet was preparing to set sail again. When he arrived, the generals were astonished. Telephus, who had been his enemy, now walked with a stick, looking haggard. He had brought no soldiers, no armor. There was only one plea. "Achilles, you have wounded me, and only you can save me. Otherwise, I will die, and you will never find your way to Troy." The camp fell silent, for it was true. After the defeat at Mysia, the Greek ships no longer knew how to get to Troy. There were no maps, no directions, and the sea, though vast, spoke no words. Achilles, hot-tempered but compassionate, finally agreed to help. With the advice of Odysseus and the guidance of Calchas, Achilles took the spear fragment that had caused the wound, ground it into powder, mixed it with wine, and applied it to the wound. And miraculously, the wound healed. Telephus, from the defeated, became the guide. He showed the Greeks the true way to Troy. The road went across the Propontis Sea, along the shores of the Dardanelles, and then to the towering walls of Ilium. They said goodbye to Telephus, who had been their enemy, but had saved the war. And the fleet set out again. No one said it out loud, but in their hearts they all knew. The war had not yet begun, and the gods had interfered too much. This story was still very long. Part 8, the first death and the foot that touched the ground. The sea was now calm. The road to Troy was finally clear thanks to Telephus's guidance. On the decks of the great ships, the warriors stood silent, looking toward the horizon, where the sun shone on the gray stone walls. There was Troy, tall, proud, and waiting. No one spoke loudly, no drums beat, only the slow sound of oars and the wind blowing through the sails like the whisper of fate. Each of them understood. The 10 years of waiting could begin today, or end as soon as we set foot on land. But before any of them could set foot on shore, the prophet Calchas was called again. He lit incense, looked up at the sky, listened to the distant bird song, and then he turned back, his face solemn. The first to step on the soil of Troy will be the first to die. Those words seemed to freeze the entire army, thousands of them, and no one wanted to be the first. The great ships were anchored close to the shore. The water was foaming white, the sand sparkled in the golden sunlight. Troy was there, yet so far away, like another world. No one dared to step down. And then Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, stepped onto the bow of the ship. With a sharp gaze, he threw his shield to the ground where the water's edge met the sand. And then he jumped down, landing on his shield, his feet not touching the ground. He did not violate the prophecy. A wise move. A fateful dodge. After Odysseus, a young man followed. Patroclus, king of Phyllis, a man of brave heart and loyal spirit. He was fearless. He did not calculate, and he did not hesitate. He stepped straight to the ground, his hair flying in the sea wind. The sand was soft under his feet, and fate locked. As soon as his feet touched the ground, Hector, Prince of Troy, was waiting. A spear was thrown, blood spurted. Patroclus fell, becoming the first Greek to die. A sacrifice, but also a beginning. No more hesitation. No more delay. The whole Greek army landed, like waves crashing on the shore. They poured onto the sand, set up camp, strung bows, sharpened swords. The battle officially began. From the walls of Troy, the Phrygian warriors looked down, saw thousands of ships, saw campfires lighting up the coast, and understood. War has come to our doorstep. But even now, with spears drawn from their sheaths, with blood soaking the sand, with a life lost, all this was only the beginning. For this war would last 10 years, and the gods had not yet let go. Part 9. The first years. The fortification of Troy and the pride of mortals. When people talk about war, when they talk about it, they often imagine the sound of drums, fierce battles, storm-like charges. But in fact, the longest wars began with silence. When the Greeks set foot on land, when the camp was erected close to the beach, when the flags fluttered on the white sand, they all thought, it will be quick, a month, a season? No one thought of 10 years. But then they were faced with something that none of the generals had prepared for. Troy was too strong. The walls were towering, built of huge stones without a single gap. It was said to have been built by Poseidon and Apollo, two gods who had been punished by Zeus and forced to serve humans. By that punishment, Troy had an impregnable fortress. The Greeks, despite their numbers, could not break through the gates. They tried many times, with ladders, with fire, with tactics, but they failed. Inside, the Trojans did not come out. They waited, patiently, confidently. Outside, the Greeks also waited. And so, the war fell into a stalemate. The first months passed in small raids, not on Troy, but on neighboring allied cities. Agamemnon ordered the sacking of small towns, the destruction of villages, the taking of food, the capture of prisoners. Each battle was a message to Troy. "If you do not come out, I will burn everything around you." In these attacks, Achilles stood out like a star. He was not only the best fighter, but also the one the gods had their eyes on. He rode his horse, galloping like the wind, piercing through the enemy formations like a spear breaking the wind, and no one could stop him. His fame spread far and wide. Even in Troy, whenever the name Achilles was mentioned, the warriors looked at each other, silent. But the brighter a person is, the more likely he is to burn himself out. The pride of the generals began to rise, not toward the enemy, but toward each other. Who was honored more? Who contributed more? Who got a bigger share of the spoils? During an attack on a small city called Lyrnessus, Achilles killed the city's leader and took a girl named Briseis, a prisoner, but also the one who moved Achilles. She was not only beautiful, she was as gentle, as deep, as calm, as the sunset after a battle. Achilles kept her by his side as a ray of light in the long, weary battle. But Agamemnon, with the power of supreme commander, demanded Briseis from Achilles, for he himself had lost the female prisoner he had chosen earlier. And that was the last straw. Achilles, who had never lost a battle, was humiliated in his heart. He withdrew from the war. Not only withdrew, but refused to fight. Not to fight, not to command, not to appear. He retreated to his tent with eyes as cold as steel and his heart burning in silence. No one could move him. Not Agamemnon, not Odysseus, not Patroclus, his closest friend, who was like a brother. The entire Greek army now had to continue the war without Achilles. On the other side, the Trojans were also strengthening their confidence. Hector, the prince of Troy, brother of Paris, began to step out of the walls, leading his troops, challenging the Greek generals. And the real battle, after much waiting, began to enter its second act. Part 10, The Death of Patroclus, When Anger Becomes Destiny. The war had dragged on. The sands were stained with blood. The names of the fallen were too numerous to remember. And in the midst of it, Achilles remained silent. He did not go to battle. He did not attend the council. He did not care about spoils or glory. He stayed in his tent, sitting alone, with anger gnawing at him every night. The only person who remained by his side was Patroclus, his best friend, his confidant, the only one who could still speak to Achilles with his heart. They grew up together, training, fighting, laughing, and sleeping under the same sky. The love between them needed no name. It went beyond friendship, as if they were two souls once separated from one. Meanwhile, the Greek army was gradually weakening. Without Achilles, they gradually lost ground to Troy's counterattacks. And the one leading those counterattacks was none other than Hector, the prince of Troy. Hector, who did not speak much but fought like a god. His shield was as strong as a bronze wall. Wherever his sword went, the Greeks retreated. One day, Hector attacked the Greek camp, burning the ships, the only place for them to retreat to their homeland. The danger of being completely annihilated was clear. Patroclus saw this. His heart could not bear it. He entered Achilles' tent, looked at his best friend, and said, "If you do not go to battle, let me wear your armor, appear on the battlefield so that the enemy will think Achilles has returned." Achilles was silent for a long time, and then nodded, not because he wanted to deceive, but because he knew he could not stop Patroclus. He had a brave heart, but his body was not of divine skin. Patroclus wore the armor of Achilles. A bronze helmet covered his face, a gold breastplate, a silver spear reflected the sunlight. And when he stepped onto the battlefield, the Greeks cheered, the Trojans retreated, for all thought, "Achilles has returned." Patroclus fought like a new wind. He drove back the enemy, rescued the ships from the fire, and charged as if death had never existed. But then, he went too far. He chased the Trojans to the gates of the city. There, Hector waited. The confrontation ensued. No one stood aside. Each side stopped. Only Patroclus and Hector remained. Patroclus fought fiercely. But then, Apollo, the god of light, sneak-attacked from behind, knocking him off balance. And Hector, seizing the opportunity, stung his spear into Patroclus's stomach. He fell. Dirt clung to his cheeks. His helmet fell off, revealing a face that was not Achilles. Hector looked, stunned, and understood. "I did not kill Achilles, I killed his best friend." Patroclus whispered his last words. "You will not live long, Hector. Achilles will come." And then he quietly left the world. The news reached the Greek camp like a bolt of lightning, but to Achilles, it was like a stab to the heart. He did not cry out immediately. He did not scream. He just stood still, clenching his fists until they bled. And then, like the sun rising after a storm, Achilles shouted, "I will return to the battlefield, not for Agamemnon, not for glory, but for Patroclus." He went to the sea, calling his mother Thetis from beneath the waves. She emerged, heartbroken, and promised to ask the blacksmith Hephaestus to make him a new suit of armor. The armor was as bright as the stars, and the shield was shaped like the universe, carved by the god himself. Achilles donned the armor. He held his head high. And for the first time in months, the battlefield was lit. A light that no one could stop. Not Troy, not Hector, not even the gods. Part 11. The final confrontation. Achilles and Hector. The wind on the battlefield that day was not like any other day. It was not the sea wind. It was not the wind from the meadows blowing through the camp. It was the wind of destiny. A cold wind that carried the sound of clashing weapons and the sound of footsteps marching straight toward blood. Achilles had returned. He stepped out of his tent amidst the astonished gazes of his comrades. He wore new armor, as radiant as the dawn, and carried on his arm a shield that depicted the entire world. That shield, forged by the smith god Hephaestus himself at the request of his mother, the sea nymph Thetis. On the battlefield, everything changed the moment the name Achilles was heard. The Trojan army panicked, the Greeks roared, and Achilles said nothing. He only looked in one direction, where Hector stood, upon the high city wall. Hector knew this moment would come. There was no escape, no turning back. He put on his armor, fastened his sword, and bid his family farewell. His wife, Andromache, clung to his arm. "Don't go. You don't need to win. We need you to live." But Hector nodded gently. "If I do not face this, honor will die before I do." He descended from the city wall, walked straight out to the open ground between the two armies, and waited. Achilles arrived. No greeting, no pause, no hesitation. And the fight began. Spears swung. Shields crashed against shields. Two men, one for a friend, one for honor. Every thrust, every step back carried the final breath of a mythological century. Hector fought like thunder, but Achilles was faster, more agile, as sharp as a steel-laced wind. And then, after a dodge, Achilles spotted an opening beneath the collar of Hector's armor. He thrust his spear into it, and everything fell silent. Hector collapsed. His blood soaked the sand. His eyes looked up at the Trojan sky, and he whispered, "Please, return my body to my family. For a funeral, do not let my flesh be food for the dogs." But Achilles did not answer with words. He only looked at the man who had killed Patroclus, and his heart could not soften. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it around the city of Troy, before the horrified eyes of soldiers on both sides and the suffocating grief of King Priam, Hector's father, standing on the wall, watching his son be defiled. For 3 days, Achilles kept Hector's body, refusing it burial as a means of vengeance. For 3 days the gods watched, and then Apollo spoke. "It is enough, even hatred has its limits." Zeus nodded, and sent Hermes, the messenger god, to meet King Priam. That night, the old king quietly entered the Greek camp, without soldiers, carrying only a bag of gold and a weary gaze like the autumn wind. Priam entered Achilles' tent, knelt, and said, "I do not come to beg for mercy, but to bring my son home. I have already lost too much." Achilles looked at the old father, and finally, his heart broke. He thought of his own father, Peleus, and wondered, if one day my father also has to kneel to beg for my body, will anyone listen to him? And so Achilles returned Hector's body. They declared a short truce so that Troy could hold a funeral, burn the body, and bid their hero farewell. In that moment, there was no Troy. There was no Greece. There were only people, living and losing. And the war quietly waited for the next act. Part 12. The Death of Achilles. When the immortal meets the weak heel. After Hector's death, the battlefield was strangely quiet. Both Greece and Troy paused, as if war needed a breath. Achilles, the one who killed Hector, was no longer angry, no longer furious, no longer had a goal. He returned the body and, for a rare moment, was a man again. But war spares no one, even the son of a god. Even if his armor shone like the sun, fate knew where the weak spot lay. Achilles continued to fight, quiet, swift, uncompromising. Every step he took was a fear to the Trojans. No one could stop him, no generals, no fortresses, not even the gods. Or at least, until one day. In the battles that followed Hector's death, Achilles became reckless, not because he was weak, but because he had nothing left to lose. He charged into battle, killing many Trojan princes, making the gods, especially Apollo, angry. Apollo, who had helped Hector, now secretly plotted revenge. Inside the city of Troy, Paris, the prince who had caused it all, was given a bow, and Apollo guided the arrow. On the battlefield, Achilles was fighting. He did not notice the person standing far away with the bow in his hand. Paris pulled the string. The arrow flew, fast, light, almost soundless. But not just any arrow. Apollo caught it in the wind and aimed it at Achilles' heel, the only place that was not dipped into the river Styx. And so, the arrow pierced the flesh. Not hard, not deep, but accurate. Achilles stopped. He looked down at his feet, and then he fell. No one could believe their eyes. The battlefield, both Greek and Trojan, was silent. The invincible one, the most handsome, the fastest, the strongest, the son of Thetis, the one who had defeated Hector, now collapsed from a wound in his heel. The Greek warriors rushed in, and with a last effort, Achilles was carried back to the camp. He lay there, gasp, looking up at the tent ceiling as if looking at the sky. He was about to leave. Patroclus was waiting for him on the other side. Glory, Immortality, victory, all of it faded away. He said only one word: "Bury me beside Patroclus." And then the greatest hero of the Trojan War was gone. Not because of the sword, not because of the enemy, but because of the smallest weakness, the heel. And from then on, the phrase Achilles' heel became a symbol for the fatal weakness of any man, no matter how great he was. Achilles' funeral was like no other. The Greeks wept like children. The Trojan enemies stood still. The gods, though some hated him, admitted he was a man, almost a god. His ashes were mixed with Patroclus's, placed in a golden urn, and buried deep by the sea, where the waves would forever whisper their names. And then the war continued. Without Achilles, there was no Hector, but the rage, the pride, and the destiny were not over yet. Part 13. The Armor of Achilles and the Tragedy of Ajax. Achilles is gone, but his armor is still there. The shining gold armor, made by the blacksmith god Hephaestus himself, still hangs silently in the Greek camp, like a sacred relic carrying glory and loss. And then the question arises, who is worthy to inherit it? It is not just a suit of armor. It is the title of hero of Greece, the one who will replace Achilles as the leader for the rest of the war. Two names stand out: Ajax, the warrior of Salamis, and Odysseus, the wise king of Ithaca. Ajax is the image of pure strength, tall, muscular, loyal, always at the forefront of every battle. Not good at speaking, but when it comes to holding a shield and charging into battle, no one can compare. Odysseus, on the other hand, is a man of the mind, not tall but sharp, clever, and the one who creates plans that have made Troy fall many times. Both have their reasons. Both are respected. And so, a council of Greek kings is convened to vote, to choose who is worthy of the armor of Achilles. The debate takes place between strength and intelligence, between sword and strategy, between Ajax and Odysseus, the one who stands tall, the one who speaks well, the one who fights well, the one who thinks deeply. And in the end, Odysseus wins by persuasive words, by wisdom, by a little favoritism from Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who always loves Odysseus. The armor is given. Ajax stood still, no response, no one saw. In the tall warrior's eyes, a small crack was spreading. That night, Ajax retreated into camp. No one bothered him. No one dared to say anything. But inside Ajax, a different war was going on. Not with the enemy, but with his wounded pride. And then it was said that the goddess Eris, the goddess of discord, who had thrown the golden apple long ago, whispered in Ajax's ear. Or maybe it was just an echo of his own broken heart. In his dream, or delirium, Ajax thought that the Greek camp had betrayed him. He took his sword, rushed out into the night, and attacked the herd of cattle, thinking they were traitors. When he woke up, he saw blood all over his hands. Not human blood, but enough for Ajax to understand. He had lost control. And for a man like Ajax, who had lived for honor, the loss of honor was worse than death. He said nothing. He did not cry. He did not complain. He simply walked to the edge of the sea, put his sword in the sand, and leaned on the blade, silently. Not a sound. Only the waves lapped against the shore as if trying to whisper something. The next morning, the Greeks found his body, silent, as solid as a rock, like a fallen monument. They buried him with all due respect. No one mentioned the vote again. No one argued about armor or power, because now a brother was dead. Not because of the enemy, but because of wounded pride, and Troy still stood, unbroken, unshaken. And Greece lost two of its greatest heroes. Part 14, The Final Prophecies, and the weapon that decided the war. Troy had not yet fallen. Though 10 years had passed, though thousands of lives had fallen, though two great heroes, Achilles and Ajax, had turned to dust, the mighty walls still stood tall in the sky. In the Greek camp, a feeling of weariness crept into every soldier. No one said it, but everyone thought, "Can we win?" When strength and tactics were no longer effective, people turned to the gods and to prophecy. The prophet Calchas was summoned again. He burned incense, watched the wind, listened to the birds, and then spoke words that silenced the entire council. If you want Troy to fall, you must have three things: the arrows of Heracles, the son of Achilles, and the theft of the sacred statue of Athena, the statue called the Palladium, which is hidden in the heart of Troy. 3 things. 3 seemingly impossible tasks. But the Greeks had no choice. The first task, the arrows of Heracles. Heracles, the legendary hero who overcame the 12 terrible trials, left arrows soaked in dragon's blood, which, if hit lightly, were enough to strike fear into the gods. They were in the hands of one man, Philoctetes, a former comrade of the Greek army. But he had been left on the island of Lemnos since the beginning of the war, because the stench of his leg wound had frightened everyone. Now, they needed him back. Odysseus and Diomedes were sent. At first, Philoctetes refused. His heart was still broken. He had been abandoned, and now he was begged to return as a savior. But when he heard of Achilles' death, when he was promised that his honor would be restored, and when he learned that the fate of Greece depended on him, Philoctetes agreed. He boarded a ship with the sacred arrows of Heracles and returned to the battlefield where he had been abandoned. Second quest, Achilles' son. Achilles was dead, but he had once had a son with the princess of Scyros. The boy's name was Neoptolemus, still young, never seen battle, never seen blood. But the prophecy was clear. Without Neoptolemus, Troy would not have fallen. Odysseus once again was sent. He convinced the young man that his father, Achilles, had died, and now it was his turn to complete the unfinished mission. Neoptolemus agreed, not for glory, but to carry on his father's spirit. He boarded the ship carrying his father's name and a determined look in his eyes. Mission 3, steal the Palladium. The Palladium was the heart and soul of Troy, a small statue of the goddess Athena, hidden deep in a secret temple. As long as the statue was there, Troy was impregnable. Only by sneaking in, taking the statue, could Greece win. And this mission was given to 2 men, Odysseus and Diomedes. They disguised themselves, waited for night, sneaking through the gates, sneaking through the roofs and alleys, passing the guards, and finally reaching the Palladium, without a sound, without a trace. They took the statue and quietly retreated. No one in Troy knew that. That night, their protective shield had disappeared. The 3 conditions all fulfilled, and now the Greek camp burned all night long, not to celebrate, but to prepare for the final blow. A plan that only a mind like Odysseus could have thought of. And you know it, a wooden horse. But let me tell you that gently in the next part. Part 15, The Trojan Horse. A trap that opens silently in the dark. The Greek camp that day was suddenly strangely silent. No more swords being sharpened. No camp smoke. No cheers, no war horses, no sign of activity. And then, the next morning, they were gone. From the walls of Troy, the soldiers looked down. The entire beach was empty. Only one thing remained in the sand: a giant wooden horse. The people gathered. The Trojan generals gathered. The royal family also appeared. Everyone wondered, are they leaving? Are they really retreating? Some were happy, some were skeptical, some did not believe. One person in particular did not believe was Laocoon, priest of Poseidon. He stepped into the crowd, angrily shouting, "Why believe in a gift from an enemy? This horse is not simple." He threw a spear into the wooden horse's chest. The spear sank deep. The wood resonated with a hollow sound, like the breathing of a secret. At that moment, as if the gods were angry, two giant snakes emerged from the sea, slid across the sand, and charged straight at Laocoon and his two sons. Screams echoed across the shore. The Trojans were horrified. The snakes wrapped themselves tightly, crushing their bones, and then disappeared into the sea. The Trojans were terrified. And then they came to a conclusion. Laocoon has desecrated a sacred gift. This is punishment. The horse is an offering to Athena. In a daze and fear, King Priam ordered the horse to be brought into the city. They broke down the gates, made a road, and dragged the horse into the heart of Troy, amid cheers and ribbons tied to the horse's mane. They celebrated. They drank. They believed the war was over. Night fell. All the lamps were lit. All the wine glasses were empty. Troy slept in victory. But as inside the horse led, there were men. They were Odysseus, Neoptolemus, Diomedes, and the best warriors of Greece, hidden in the hollow belly of the wooden horse. They did not move, not a breath, waiting for the signal. And the signal came when the moon was high in the sky. A Greek named Sinon, who had pretended to be abandoned by the Greeks, stealthily opened the horse's secret door. From the darkness, the soldiers crept out like shadows. They ran to open the city gates, and out there, the entire Greek fleet had returned, hidden in the darkness, waiting. The city gates opened. The Greeks poured in. No one woke up in time. Fires burned in the streets. The clang of steel echoed through the palace. Troy fell into eternal darkness. People died like straw. Houses collapsed like sand. Children were torn from their mothers. Red torches lit the sky. Priam, the old king, was killed at the altar. Andromache, Hector's wife, was taken as a slave. Astyanax, Hector's son, was thrown over the city walls. There was no mercy, no justice, only destruction. And Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, was the one who killed Priam. In a moment, history and legend became one. When dawn broke, Troy was no more. Only broken walls, piles of ashes, and an empty wooden horse. History will forever remember. No power could destroy Troy. Only deception and blind faith. Part 16. The Survivors and the Dream of Rome. Troy had fallen. No more singing on the rooftops. No more children playing in the alleys. Only ashes and sobs buried deep in the rubble. Among the few survivors was a young man. Not a famous warrior, not a powerful prince. His name was Aeneas. Aeneas was the son of Anchises and the goddess Aphrodite. Despite his divine blood, he did not stand out among the Trojan heroes. But fate had a different path for him. As Troy burned, Aeneas did not run. He carried his father on his back, took his young son, Ascanius, by the hand, and walked through the night, through the ashes, toward life. Behind him, his wife, Creusa, was lost. Her name echoed in the mist, but there was only a whisper of the wind. Aeneas did not know where he was going. He only knew he had to leave Troy. He had to live. He had to carry the sacred fire, the symbol of his people, to a new land. He and the other survivors boarded ships, left the ruined shores, and wandered the seas for many years. They were caught in Poseidon's storms, lost on deserted islands, faced monsters, witches, and temptations. In Carthage, a wealthy city in North Africa, Aeneas met Queen Dido. She fell in love with him, gave him her heart, and asked him to stay. But the gods whispered to Aeneas in his dream, "Your destiny is not here. You must go, for the sake of an empire greater than Troy." Despite his pain, Aeneas left Dido, and she, broken, took her own life. Her final curse would set off the war between Carthage and Rome centuries later. Finally, Aeneas set foot in Latium, in what is now Italy. There, he met King Latinus, married Princess Lavinia, and began to lay the foundations of a new city. An empire did not yet exist, but destiny was already written. Aeneas's son, Ascanius, would found Alba Longa, and from there, Romulus, their descendant, would build Rome, the heart of an entire civilization. And so, though Troy burned, the dream did not die. It only transformed, blossoming in another land. The Greeks won the battle, but they could not keep the peace. Those who returned were broken. Agamemnon was murdered by his wife. Menelaus found Helen, but her eyes were no longer the same. Odysseus wandered for 10 years before returning, with gray hair and a heavy heart. Troy was lost. But its legend of love, war, hatred, and rebirth lives on. And if tonight you hear the wind outside your window, the rustle of leaves, it could be the whispers of the spirits of Troy, still wandering through human dreams and silently telling this endless story.